Hello and welcome to the Wake Up Call podcast. Today we're speaking with Mr. Jacob Hornberger about U.S. foreign policy, the national security state, and Blowback. Mr. Hornberger is founder and president of the Future of Freedom Foundation. He is a former trial attorney and previously was an adjunct professor at the University of Dallas, where he taught law and economics. He has also served as the director of programs at the Foundation for Economic Education. You can follow his work at fff.org or on Twitter at Future of Freedom and on Facebook under the Future of Freedom Foundation Facebook page. For more information, see the show notes page for this episode at wakeupcallpodcast.com/security-state. Jacob, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Nice to be here with you guys.
Okay, so let's start off with a very broad question and somewhat nuanced question. When is a war justified, and is it ever justified?
Well, I hold that it is justified, and it's justified in those instances where another nation state invades one's own country. And in that case, the concept would be a defensive war. And the idea is much like when it's narrowed down to the individual basis, that if somebody strikes me, I have a right to defend myself. And so I hold that people have a right to delegate that right of self-defense to an independent third party. In criminal cases, we would delegate that to the sheriff and to the judicial system. And in the cases of an invasion or an attack by a foreign state, I hold that would be a legitimate war.
Okay, now coming out of these illegitimate wars that we've seen recently, we've seen the development of what someone might call the national security establishment. So can you go into how that establishment came to be and what we mean by national security establishment?
Yeah, let's go back originally to the founding of the Republic. It's clear that the framers and our American ancestors living at that time had a clear antipathy towards big standing military establishments. You can see this in their quotes. They feared a giant military. They believed that a giant military would be the gravest threat to their freedom, to their well-being. And so while there was a basic military that came into existence when the United States was established, it certainly was of minimal size. It certainly was not the kind of military establishment that we have today. Now, during times of war, the government necessarily will build up an enormous military establishment as well as an intelligence establishment as well. But traditionally in U.S. history, the idea was that, okay, you build up this establishment for the war, but as soon as the war is over, you dismantle it. And you return to the original concept of just a basic military force to stand guard in case the nation is attacked and mobilize the citizenry if that were to happen. Along comes World War II, and everything changes. The United States is involved in the war. It's many would say as a result of provocations by the Franklin Roosevelt administration. He wanted to get in the war. The American people were overwhelmingly opposed to getting in the war. And he provokes the Japanese and the Germans, but succeeds in the case of the Japanese. And so he gains what some historians have called a backdoor to the European conflict. Well, ordinarily you would expect then that at the end of that war, they defeat Nazi Germany. They're going to bring all the troops home, dismantle the military establishment, and proceed as they had done historically. That's not what happened here. Instead, the people who favored a national security establishment or a national security state said, look, we have a new official enemy here. And that new official enemy is our partner and ally during the war, the Soviet Union. And therefore, because we have this new official enemy here in Europe that is refusing to get out of Eastern Europe, we now need to convert America's governmental system to essentially the same type of apparatus that the Soviet Union had, to a military, to a national security state. Now, what does that mean? Well, national security establishments have long characterized totalitarian regimes. They consist of an enormous permanent military establishment along with a secretive intelligence agency that has the power to monitor the citizens, keep track of people. And then you have agencies like the National Security Agency that has like secret surveillance scheme. To a certain extent, the FBI is part of this establishment. But the whole idea revolves around this concept of national security. Now, no one's ever been able to define the term, but it essentially has become the two most important words in the English lexicon, certainly for the American people ever since World War II. So you have a dramatic alteration of America's governmental system without a constitutional amendment, which is required when you're going to alter the governmental system. Instead, it just simply came into being, or actually remained into being. Now, the National Security Act of 1947 calls the CIA into existence. The original idea was that the CIA would be only an intelligence gathering agency, but somebody in Congress slipped in some language, some nebulous language in the Enabling Act that the CIA construed to essentially give them omnipotent powers, especially with respect to assassination and affecting regime changes in foreign countries, and to do all this in total secrecy. So ever since then, we've lived under this totalitarian apparatus, and it was always justified as saying, well, this is the Cold War. If we didn't have the Cold War, this would not be necessary. We could restore a limited government republic to our land. Well, when the Cold War ended, that's not what happened. Instead, the national security state remained in existence. It certainly did not dismantle NATO, which had been designed to protect Europe from a Soviet attack. Instead, they used NATO to absorb Eastern European countries all the way almost up to Russia's border, which has precipitated this latest crisis. And then they went into the Middle East and started provoking hornets' nests, killing people to such a point that finally there was terrorist retaliation numerous times, not just on 9/11. And that terrorist retaliation then gave rise to the war on terrorism, all the more interventions in the Middle East, the invasions of Iraq and Afghanistan, until it really has become what I call the greatest terrorist-producing machine in history. The more people they kill, the more terrorists they produce, the more anger, the more rage, and the more they justify this by saying, well, we need to keep you safe now from these enemies that they themselves have produced. You have to give us bigger budgets, more military spending, and essentially keep us in existence into perpetuity. That's the national security establishment.
And one thing, kind of tying back to the first question about the defensive wars, a lot of these establishments would not be necessary in a purely defensive war. You really wouldn't need them at all. But moving on, you were talking about the Middle East, and I'd like to ask a little bit more in depth. Can you go a little bit into the history of why NATO entered the Middle East and what America's role has been in the Middle East over the past 20 to 50 years?
Yeah, let me just first address that point you made. That's a very interesting observation you've made, because that is the argument that I make, and it shocks some people because we're so used to this huge military, the Pentagon, the CIA, the NSA. I mean, we all grow up with it. We're born under it. It's the system we're known, and then we're taught that this is what a free society is all about. And I continue telling people that this is a totally unnecessary apparatus, especially because of the United States' unique position with two oceans separating Europe and Asia from the United States. That is, there is no nation state that has the remotest military capability, the money, the resources, the troops, the weaponry that would be, or even the interest that it would take to cross the oceans in a massive invasion force and successfully invade and conquer and occupy the United States. They just don't exist. So there is no possibility whatsoever that can happen. And so the next question is, well, what about the terrorist threat? Well, that's not an existential threat. That the terrorists may kill a few people or blow up a few buildings, but they're not going to conquer the United States. And more important, they are produced by the U.S. national security state itself. So they produce through their policies the very enemy that they then say, well, now you have to keep us in existence so that we can keep you safe. So, yeah, we don't need this apparatus. And in fact, it makes us more unsafe, and it threatens our economic prosperity with a huge drain on the budget. Now, on your second question on the Middle East, if we go back to the Cold War in 1989, the national security establishment was panicked, because ever since the kids that are growing up today, all that I hear about is terrorism, and to a certain extent, Muslim and Islam and the Islamic threat and ISIS and Al Qaeda and so forth. For us, the official enemy was communism. That communists are coming to get us. Look under your beds for communists. They're everywhere. The House Select, the House Un-Americans Activities Committee. I mean, everything was this obsession with communism in the Soviet Union, Cuba. This was all national security state propaganda. I mean, fear is the coin of the realm in a national security state. They have to keep people afraid. They need crises. They need enemies to keep people all nervous and riled up and saying, oh, please keep protecting us. Well, in 1989, they were freaking out because all of a suddenly, what no one had predicted was all of a sudden the Cold War is over. The Soviet Union is dismantling. The Berlin Wall is falling. Germany is uniting. Soviet troops are leaving Eastern Europe. And all of a sudden, people start calling for what they were calling a peace dividend, which meant, hey, look, now the Cold War is over and you've justified this huge apparatus with the Cold War, that means we can start significantly reducing the military budgets and questioning the things the CIA is doing and everything. Because remember, this was the justification for bringing this thing into existence in the first place. So the military and the CIA were freaking out, and they said, oh, no, we can wage the drug war. There's drug lords out there. We can help American businesses open up markets. You need us still. Well, in the meantime, they go into the Middle East. They start provoking hornets' nests. You've got the first example of this is the Persian Gulf intervention, where their ally and partner, because they do ally with brutal dictators, and this one was Saddam Hussein, the leader of Iraq. They turned on him. They had led him to believe that if he invaded Kuwait, that this was none of the U.S.'s business, and anyway, they were partners with Saddam. Well, so Saddam has this battle with Kuwait over oil drilling rights, and so he invades, and all of a sudden now we're facing the new Hitler. This is the new official enemy. That, my gosh, we've got to stop this. If it doesn't, he's going to end up conquering the world. I mean, this is a third-rate country. So here they go into Iraq, and they, of course, reverse the invasion. I mean, this is a third-world country versus a first-rate military. But in the process, they kill multitudes of Iraqis. I mean, thousands. We don't know exactly the exact number, but it was a massacre. And in addition to that, they imposed a brutal regime of sanctions on Iraq and destroyed their water and sewage facilities on purpose, knowing that would mean some very, very bad health conditions. And then with the sanctions, they prevented them from repairing those facilities. Well, they leave those sanctions on for 11 years because they tell Saddam, we're going to keep these sanctions on until you get out of power. And so here you have a regime change mindset. Well, in the process, the sanctions are killing hundreds of thousands of Iraqi children through infectious illnesses. I mean, this was sewage-infected water that people were drinking. And so you've got this hundreds of thousands of children dying. 2 high UN officials resigned. Madeleine Albright, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, is asked by 60 Minutes in 96 whether the deaths of 500,000 Iraqi children are worth it. From the sanctions, and she says, well, it's a tough decision, but yes, it's worth it. Well, in the meantime, now you got the unconditional support for Israel, regardless of how they treat the Palestinians. You've got U.S. troops near Islamic Holy Lands, which is riling people up. So you got this massive amount of rage just boiling in the Middle East. And that finally manifests itself with anti-American terrorism. You've got the 1993 attack on the World Trade Center. You've got the attacks on the USS Cole and the embassies in East Africa. You've got 9/11. You've had a multitude of attacks since then. And so here, this was a dream come true for them. Now they've got a new official enemy. It's even better than communism. It's now they've got terrorism. And they said from the very beginning after 9/11, this was going to last longer than the Cold War, because boy, there's a lot of terrorists in the world. Especially when you go in there and you keep killing people like they did with their invasion of Iraq and the invasion of Afghanistan. And so, yeah, it's going to last longer than the Cold War, which lasted some 45 years. So, yeah, this is how they went into the Middle East, poked hornet's nests, got the response that anyone would have predicted, and we predicted it at the Future of Freedom Foundation before 9/11. There was a man named Chalmers Johnson who's written a fantastic trilogy of books on this whole concept of foreign policy, interventionism, empire, and he said this was going to happen in the book Blowback, which is a book I still recommend. It is so fantastic. It was written before 9/11, saying, look, if you don't stop doing these things in the Middle East, you're going to see a major terrorist attack on American soil. We said the same thing here at FFF, and of course, no one listened to us, and we ended up getting this blowback.
Well, and then you still have people, especially with prominent roles in the pundit class or amongst politicians, who will deny this. And if you mention blowback, then they'll try to smear you, and they'll promote this line that they just hate us for our freedoms. But it seems really undeniable that actions have consequences. And when you're going around stirring up hornets' nests and committing acts of violence and of war against people that don't like that, then there's going to be some sort of response.
Well, that's right. But you hit the nail on the head. There's nothing they fear more than the American people starting to analyze why there is this threat of terrorism. I mean, some people just act like it's like the flu, that, the flu just hit this family this month or this nation this month. And terrorism, oh my gosh, it finally reached America, like mosquitoes or something, or killer bees. But if you start analyzing it and you say, wait a minute, no, that's not the case, that there is cause and effect here, that they did this through their policies, and this was the natural reaction of people who were very angry over their loved ones dying, seeing children die, and if you look at the sentencing statement of a man named Ramzi Youssef, who was one of the 1993 terrorists on the attack on the World Trade Center, at his sentencing hearing, it's just filled with rage. He says things like, you call me a terrorist, but you're the real butchers. Look at what you've done killing these children in Iraq. So that's the point that the national security state does not want people to focus on. And you see in this presidential race, nobody's talking about what are the real causes of terrorism. They allude to them, it's Muslims, that the Islam is a violent religion. But notice something important here, that during the Cold War, all the way up to 1989, nobody talked about Islam. Nobody said anything about those violent Muslims. On the contrary, it was when the U.S. was partnering with these extremist Muslims, when it was the Soviet Union doing the occupying of Afghanistan, everybody cheered. Hey, this is fantastic that we're partnering with these violent Muslims, and yeah, because they were on our side. And then many of those people that we were partnering with, or that the government was partnering with, later became Al-Qaeda and the terrorists that hate the United States. And a classic example of what your point you just made was when Ron Paul, in that 2008 presidential debate, said, hey, they came over here because we, meaning the government, was over there killing them. Boy, everybody went ballistic. I mean, they all pounced on him, all the other candidates, because you're not supposed to speak that truth. And that same phenomenon, unfortunately, goes on today. But I think more and more people are figuring out that, hey, there's a reason why there's so much anti-American rage over in that part of the world.
Well, and in addition to seeing blowback manifested via terrorist attacks, we've also seen blowback manifested via I guess we could say the ramping up of the police state at home, and the ramping up of the national security state at home with an expanded executive with more emergency powers, with assassination programs both at home and abroad, with torture, with an increase in powers for the NSA to perform surveillance. So what are some of the worst aspects of blowback as far as the domestic components of the war on terrorism are concerned?
Now, that is a great point. I mean, this is what the framers, the founding fathers, this is what they feared. This is why they refused to bring a standing army in existence, because they knew that ultimately, and you can read their quotes on it. We've got them on our website. We've got some articles on standing armies. Just Google standing armies at fff.org. And they said that ultimately the standing army starts to look at the citizenry themselves, especially the ones who are dissenting, who are criticizing this, as enemies of the state or dangerous people or fifth columnists. But the most you're calling them emergency powers is so apt, because that's what they are. And remember that this is what totalitarian regimes do. They call for emergency powers. You look back in history, Nazi Germany, they had the Enabling Act. When after the terrorist attack on the Reichstag, they called it emergency powers. And you see it every time there's a big crisis. Russia or North Korea is famous for this. That whenever it looks like the United States might invade, they exercise more power over their citizenry. But here, the national security state does the same thing. And the most phenomenal power is the power to assassinate Americans. It's bad enough to go abroad and start assassinating people. I mean, when you start getting to the assassination business, things are real dicey here. Because look at some of the dictators that have engaged in assassination. There was Augusto Pinochet, one of the most brutal dictators in history. He had a formal assassination program that killed thousands of people. The CIA was a partner in it, until it finally manifested itself by the assassination of a former Allende official on the streets of Washington, D.C., a man named Orlando Letelier. And that was when the U.S. drew the line and said, this is murder. And it is murder. When you're killing people who are guilty of committing really a criminal offense, and you're just murdering them without a trial. Well, it's bad enough to be doing that to foreigners, but now the courts have upheld this emergency power of the military and the CIA to assassinate Americans with impunity. I mean, there's no review. You can't sue for wrongful death. If they assassinate you because they suspect you're a terrorist, that's the end of the story. I mean, there is no way to reconcile that kind of power with a free society. They also have the power to round up Americans. Much as they rounded up Japanese Americans, they can round up anybody they want now and put them into concentration camps like they did with the Japanese, and they can torture them to their heart's content, without interference by the courts, as long as they call them a terrorist. And they've got some bit of evidence to support that, even if it's based on hearsay. And that's what the Jose Padilla case established. The courts upheld the power of the military and the president and the CIA to take Americans into custody, put them into concentration camps, torture them, and really by implication, because since they have the power to assassinate them, to execute them, all without due process of law, no trials. I mean, look at the system they've established at Guantanamo. In a real crisis, these powers are now on standby. These powers to be applied against Americans. So when people think in terms of electing Hillary Clinton president or Donald Trump or any of these people, Cruz, Sanders, that regardless of who they're electing, everybody should understand that whoever's in there has the power to assassinate Americans and has the power to round up Americans and put them into concentration camps and torture them and keep them there indefinitely.
Yeah, it's something that's a really scary thing to think about. And some other issues with the national security establishment are just the economic costs of the entire establishment. Can you talk a bit about the economic costs and some of the problems monetarily?
Yeah, they're heading America into bankruptcy. And now it's as if the American people are caught in a vice. And on one side of the vice is the welfare state that's in itself is bankrupting America with Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, education grants, bailouts, the whole panoply of welfare state programs, including foreign aid to dictators. I mean, that's a big chunk of this too. And then on the other side is the national security state. Their budgets continue to increase. They're higher than they were during the Cold War. And there's no end in sight. When anybody suggests, hey, look, we've got spending and debt out of control, the welfare state people say, well, you're not going to take our dole. We're dependent on it. And then on the warfare state side, they say, oh, no, wait a minute. We have crises here. Now we're pivoting toward China, and that's a crisis. And North Korea is always a crisis. And now Russia's a crisis over in Ukraine. And we've got the Middle East that's in crisis, Syria. So there's always this crisis. You can't cut our budget. Well, we all know what's happening with the debt. I mean, it's skyrocketing. They continue to spend much more than they're bringing in. Every time the debt ceiling is reached, which is a debt ceiling is acknowledged by Congress that too much debt is a dangerous thing, they raise it, enabling more debt. And then as soon as it's raised, nobody says, hey, well, okay, let's start slashing spending, except libertarians, in preparation for the next time the debt ceiling's raised, because everybody knows the game's going to go on again. That as soon as the debt ceiling's reached the next time, they're going to start screaming, their sky is falling, Chicken Little stuff. And so they know that each time they can get the debt ceiling raised. Well, look at Greece. We see what happens when a government overspends itself and goes excessively into debt. Look at Puerto Rico. Look at some of the American cities that have gone bankrupt. That's where they're heading us, and it's not pretty. I mean, we have all the makings, really, of what could be a very perfect storm here with respect to tyranny. We've got the potential for a fiscal crisis, economic crisis, a terrorism crisis, because they're still killing people on a daily basis. They're killing people over there, and all of this could come together to make things really, really nasty. Because remember, in the Great Depression, you had emergency powers that were being undertaken because of economics. I mean, they could establish capital controls or start seizing IRAs if they're desperate for money and stuff. But then you've got the warfare state now side of this, which is the potential for a huge crisis environment. So it doesn't look like this thing can end pretty. Now, people think, if I just elect the right person, he's going to get me out of this or get the country out of this. They don't understand that this is not a person problem. This is a structural problem, that the structure was changed. America's founding principles were abandoned, both on welfare, because America lived without a welfare state for some 125 years, and the warfare state, which America lived with for more than a century also.
Well, you've definitely outlined several reasons why we should be pessimistic for the future, but do you see any reasons to be optimistic? Is there any chance we might see some aspects of the national security state may be rolled back or some of the powers restricted, or is that just not a reasonable thing to see coming in the near future?
Well, I hate to pass out any cyanide capsules to anybody, but no, I mean, you never know about the power of ideas. Ideas can change society. I mean, there's a reason why totalitarian dictatorships shut programs like this down. They won't permit just one person to speak the truth about what's happening in these countries, and that's because they know that ideas on liberty have a power that are immeasurable. So we don't know what the future holds. I know this: the libertarian movement is enormous. I mean, you saw all these hundreds of thousands of people coming out when Ron Paul was running that came out of the woodwork from nowhere. I mean, I was stunned. I didn't know the movement was that large where people were gravitating toward libertarians. And so I see the libertarian movement as really being the leader in this whole process of getting America and really the world out of this status morass. And that's through the power of ideas as people start reasoning. And this is the time to be reasoning, because if there's a big crisis, that's when reason goes out the window and people start panicking, both economic crisis and a terrorist crisis or a war crisis like with Russia or China. I'm a firm believer in the power of ideas. And I know that they can bring a shift very suddenly. They can take a country by storm, sort of like a wildfire. And we saw that with the Berlin Wall. I mean, the whole thing just starts crumbling down, and everybody was stunned at how quickly the thing came apart. I think the same thing can happen with respect to moving America toward a free society, which would necessarily entail a dismantling, not a minor reform of the Pentagon and the CIA and the NSA. A free society without these apparatuses, along without the welfare state apparatuses as well. A society where people keep their own money, and decide for themselves what to do with it, and where charity and the state are totally separated and people are free to make their decisions on their own.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. And before you go, can you tell us a bit about where we can find some more readings on this, and talk to us a little bit about the Future of Freedom Foundation?
Yeah, the best resource for us is our website at fff.org, or Google the Future of Freedom Foundation. We have a daily publication called FFF Daily that we send out for free, that we carefully compile every day, that consists of hardcore libertarian articles, many of it in the mainstream press, that are written by leftists or conservatives on specific issues. That they're addressing things, and they're addressing them from really a libertarian perspective. And it has my daily blog and a daily article from FFF. And I recently started a video tidbit commenting on the presidential race every morning that's less than 2 minutes. Richard Ebeling, who teaches economics at the Citadel and was formerly the president of the Foundation for Economic Education, he and I have a weekly show called The Libertarian Angle. That's on videotape on our site. And we have a bunch of videotapes from conferences and lectures, and we believe in principles. So all of our stuff is timeless. I mean, you can pick it up, an essay that we published 25 years ago, and it'll still be applicable to what's going on today. And then I would just invite people who are just getting exposed to libertarianism to look at all the things that are going on in the libertarian movement. We link to articles from the libertarian think tanks in our FFF Daily every Saturday. But take a look at all the foundations, see which ones you like, and then start supporting all the foundations, including FFF, because this is the light that is shining through the darkness. It's the libertarian foundations and think tanks, and to a certain extent, if you like politics, the Libertarian Party. But all of this, the entire movement, is leading America out of the status morass. We're the hope, really, for getting us out of this mess.
Well, on that note, I want to remind everybody to go to wakeupcallpodcast.com/security-state. We will link to all the resources and websites mentioned during this interview. So we'll link to the Libertarian Angle, to FFF.org, to the Twitter and Facebook pages we've discussed. So that's wakeupcallpodcast.com/security-state. And I want to thank you, Jacob, for joining us today, and hopefully we can have you back on again sometime soon.
That'd be great. I really enjoyed it. It was a great way you guys conducted this interview, and it's an honor to be on your show. Thank you for having me.
All right. Well,
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Wake Up Call podcast.
If you would like to listen to more episodes, please subscribe, rate, and review the show on iTunes, or subscribe on Stitcher, and check out our website at wakeupcallpodcast.com.
There you will find show notes pages and comment sections dedicated to the show. You can also email us at contact@wakeupcallpodcast.com if you're interested in being interviewed for the show or have any other suggestions.
Thank you.